Bonjour and bienvenue to A Drink with the Past featuring your hosts,
Dane
and Jose. On today's episode, we are going to continue off of our discussion from where we left off with the French Revolution. How are we feeling today?
Excited. I'm ready for this one. Because this is actually where we get to the actual good. This is where we actually get to the nitty gritty of the French Revolution and what actually means to have a revolution, when obviously you pay a price to have a revolution, but are you ready to face the consequences or what the turnout of a revolution that you wanted?
That's true. So settle in, pour a drink of your choice, and santé as we take a drink with the pad.
Santé.
All right, so from the last time that we talked, where were we? Where were we at in France?
So, like I mentioned, basically, in France at that time was having an absolute monarchy, again started by Louis XIV, and then his successor Louis XV continued it on, and eventually it came into Louis XVI, who was the grandson of Louis XV. So basically, the absolute monarchy was a thing, and France was losing money economically, right? Because
wasn't he a more strategic as far as the ones his predecessors, with the way he was running the finances, or is he doing worse with the way he's managing it?
So basically, he did worse than it, because obviously, with Louis XV, he had to spend a lot of money due to the 7-Year War, right? The wars that were happening in Europe against Britain and their allies, and then the war that was happening in the Americas, basically in today's central United States, in the Louisiana area, right? So he basically lost a lot of money because of it, and France nearly goes bankrupt. They did go bankrupt, but then they pick it up a bit, but when Louis XVI comes into power, basically, I guess you could say he does try to manage the money of the country to try not to get it into a depression, right? But of course, you have Louis XVI spending lavishly on these parties that he always has in Versailles with the nobility class, and of course Marie Antoinette, his wife, spent a lot of money as well with her big powder wigs and the finest jewelry, the finest dresses made from the finest materials, where they're getting the trade from, obviously, because they have colonies overseas, right? So you have that, and the king's only solution, his advisors' solution to the king was always, just keep on taxing the third estate. Keep taxing the normal people, the middle class and the lower class people, and you'll pay it off.
Yeah, because they met after, was secretly, right? They met secretly, in some chamber to try to overthrow that policy of taxing them and want to tax the nobles, and then they did the whole switch up in
exactly, yeah. But a lot of people got mad at that, and the thing is, Louis XVI, again, he calls in for the Estates General, which haven't been assembled ever since the reign of Louis XIV. Louis XIV, I believe, that it hasn't been called in, and the first and second estate said no, tax the third estate, and then basically the third estate ends up wanting to make their own thing, their own meeting, and they create the National Assembly. So again, when they were trying to meet, they were locked out of their room, and they end up occupying a nearby tennis court, in which they do the tennis court oath, basically promising to each other, making a vow to each other that they would not disperse until the king basically met their demands, right? And basically, you have the Bastille, right, which actually passed recently. July 14th is Bastille Day. So July 14th, 1789, members of the Third Estate, like the peasant, they stormed the prison that was in Paris, the fortress-like prison, and they steal their weapon, they steal ammunition, gunpowder, weapons, and of course they end up killing the governor. They end up killing the governor of the Bastille.
But where are they taking all this ammunition to once they seize it all? Are they going to Versailles to meet the king, or are they going somewhere else?
So they just wanted to grab the weapons to arm themselves if anything should happen, basically, to them.
Okay.
Right. So basically, you have that, and then.
So what follows after that? After Bastille Day?
So Bastille Day, basically, the king is basically worried now, and he has to basically try everything he can to basically dwindle down the situation that was happening. Mm-hmm. He ends up having to see what the problem is. It's all this good stuff, and then it just leads us into this sort of chaos that the peasants want to do, basically.
What is that considered as during that time period when he wasn't able to dwell the mutiny against the king?
Basically, what was it? I'm trying to think here for a second. Basically, Louis XVI basically just wanted things to remain calm. Basically, he tries to regain his power, but again, he was like one of the weakest kings ever in French history. Right? He wasn't as strong as his his ancestor, Louis the 14th.
Strong as in like raw strength, or strong as in like trying to maintain the peace?
Like basically like maintaining the peace in his sense, basically.
Okay.
So it was like, for sure it was basically just like one of the crazy things of it, right? And so
so then what?
How can I explain it, right?
Yeah, but
right.
I don't know. I feel like I don't know how his advisors didn't give him any kind of sage suggestions to kind of help the situation, and I feel like they kind of failed him on that part.
Yeah.
Considering it shouldn't all be on him. He should have someone that is for the people of France, and not just someone who was like a yes man or whatever, a yes sir type of situation.
Basically. So the thing is so after the Bastille, in late August, this is like a month later, I guess you could say, like a month and a half later, the National Assembly adopted what will be called as the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, Déclaration des droits de l'homme et du citoyen, a statement of democratic principles grounded in the philosophical and political ideas of Enlightenment thinkers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, right?
Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
Yeah. And so basically it proclaimed that the Assembly's commitment to replace the Ancien Regime with a system based on equal opportunity, freedom of speech, popular sovereignty, and representative government, right?
Oh, look at that, a democracy.
Yes, exactly.
A democracy. In the end.
Yes, and I mean, for months, the members of the assembly basically wrestled with the fundamental questions about the shape in the expanse of France's new political landscape, right? Who's going to be responsible for electing delegates? Would the clergy owe allegiance to the church in Rome or the French government? So basically, is the church going to have their allegiance to the state or to Rome, which is basically the head of the church?
I mean, we have a democracy, and the church is technically still allegiant to Rome, even though we exist here in the U.S. So,
Well, yeah, that's the thing. It's like here, it's like because we have the separation of church and state, and we have the separation of.
didn't they already
church
have
and
that
state.
after this declaration?
Well, yeah, it wasn't a constitution. Like our constitution was signed in 1789.
No, but I'm talking about France. Like, since this declaration, doesn't that mean they automatically establish that separation of church and state?
You would think, yeah. Basically, I guess that was the idea of it. That like, hey, when we have the Declaration of Rights in Man, we need to make sure that we have a separation of church and state because like when the old regime happened, with King Louis, with all the kings being in power, basically the church was more focused with submitting to the authority of Rome rather than like the king. But that's not the case. Obviously, the church did have their allegiance to the king, like to the government of the country where they reside in, and they have to have their fidelity and their loyalty to the church in Rome, to the mother church in Rome. So that has already been a thing. But I guess like they're trying to like make it like clear, like you choose one or the other.
Crazy.
Either you prove your allegiance to the state or to the church, right?
They're not offering anything incentivizing for people to make it easy and make an easy decision to choose
And then of
France or the church.
Yeah, but the thing that was most important, I guess, about this was like how much authority would the king, his public image further weakened after a failed attempt to flee the country, right? Basically, how much authority would the king have?
That he already has, besides the access to an absorbent amount of money.
Basically, yeah, like how much. Because like at first there were some people that wanted to keep the again, there were some people, the moderates, that wanted to keep the monarchy, where they want to establish a constitutional monarchy where we'll still keep the king, but he's only going to be as a ceremonial figure, and we got to establish a parliament, and then but unfortunately like Louis the 16th didn't really make it. Well, we'll get into that later, but it was so the declaration would be adopted in September 3rd, 1791, and it was France's first written constitution, echoed the more moderate voices in the assembly, establishing a constitutional monarch in which the king enjoyed royal veto power and the ability to appoint ministers. So the king, at this case, like I said, it's like they want to have a parliament where basically parliament makes the laws, right? And then they'll send it to the king, where the king will decide to either sign it or veto it and send it back to the National Assembly for them to like do a redo, basically how we do it over here.
So now what?
But the bad thing is that this compromise didn't set well with the radicals, like of course Maximilien Robespierre, Camille Desmoulins, and Danton, who began drumming up popular support for a more republican form of government for the trial of King Louis the 16th.
Wow, already trying to impeach the king. I say impeach, but we get the point of what they're trying to get at. Overthrow the king.
Exactly. So, more radicalism is about to come, okay? In April of 1792, the newly elected Legislative Assembly declared war on Austria and Prussia, where it believed that French immigrants were building counter-revolutionary alliances. It also hoped to spread its revolutionary ideals across Europe through warfare.
Wow, even after the declaration, there's someone being on some.
That's the thing. The paranoia was just so real in France at that time, where basically they were like, these radicals, these lawyers, and these lawyers, doctors, merchants, or like ordinary people, right? They basically started fearing that, we're gonna experience this counter-revolutionary from, I guess you can call them like fugitives, asylum seekers, like in those terms. If you want to use today's term, like political, political refugees, I guess you could say. But like they were scared. They were basically scared that something was gonna happen to them. That basically like the royalists were talking to Prussia and Austria and sending their forces to France to subdue the revolution and put Louis back in power.
So then what happens with this paranoia?
So basically they basically just drafted a bunch of men to go fight a war that they just declared on France and hopefully to spread the ideas of the revolution throughout Europe. To encourage other countries in Europe to rise up against their leaders, against the kings. But on the domestic front, meanwhile, the political crisis took a radical turn when a group of insurgents led by the extremist Jacobins attacked the royal residence in Paris and arrested the king on August 10, 1792. So at this point...
So what is he being committed for?
Well, they're basically charging him with, I guess, treason. I guess you could say that they're charging him for treason because before Louis XVI and his family, they tried to flee France.
Flee France to where? Anywhere else?
To Austria. No, they tried to flee France to Austria. So that way Louis XIV. So that way Louis can ask for the assistance of the Austrian emperor.
So how's that committing treason?
In their thought, he's betraying the country by asking aid from a foreign power, and nonetheless like an enemy of France. Because again, the French didn't like the Austrians. They hated the Austrians, and so
Okay, so he is charged for treason essentially. So what happens after he is arrested? Wait, is he arrested while he's trying to flee, or when he comes back from?
So when they bring him back to Paris.
So he was already on his way over to Austria.
Mm-hmm. And he gets stopped like close to the border. He gets stopped close to the border and like he gets caught. So he gets caught and he gets sent back to Paris, and it was there like where on that day where the Jacobins arrest the king.
So what happens after they're in France and he gets arrested?
So a few months later, on January 21st, 1793, the National Convention, which basically replaced the Legislative Assembly, the National Convention ends up sending King Louis XVI to death. Okay, so they condemn Louis XVI to death for high treason and crimes against the state, and he would be sentenced to be beheaded by guillotine. An invention, mind you, that he approved of.
He's the one that approved it, or his predecessors?
No, it was him. It was Louis XVI that approved the guillotine for executional purposes. Because it was a quick and painless death. Instead of having, an axe, right, with manpower, just use like a heavy weight to like chop the chop the head off. And I guess but it was invented by a doctor. That's the thing. Guillotine is the name of the doctor that created it.
What is his name? Guillaume?
Guillotine. His last name is Guillotine.
Oh, I thought
his doctor. Okay. The doctor that approved it, his last name is Guillotine.
Oh, I thought only part of the word guillotine was like his name or something. But okay. So now
he ends up
dead.
and then Marie Antoinette, unfortunately, would suffer the same fate 9 months later.
For being associated? Oh no, bro.
And it was like total BS. It was total. I don't know. It's sad, really. No, it's
did she
really.
even have a choice? Like,
no. Well, here's the thing. Her death was not meant to have happened. Like she should not have been killed in the first place, because the way how they staged her trial was rigged. It was like her entire trial was rigged, and like she was accused of like doing like unspeakable things, like her children, and things like that, and it was ridiculous. This whole thing. This is what radicalism really does. And I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. Conservatives don't do it either, because obviously no side is perfect. Whether you're a radical or a conservative, it's like people do those things. So, anyways, after the death of Marie Antoinette and King Louis the 16th, in 17. So that's when the Reign of Terror happens.
What is that?
The Reign of Terror happens literally after the execution of
is this because
King Louis the 16th. So it is said that the Reign of Terror actually happens after the execution of Louis the 16th, and that Marie Antoinette was like the victim of the Reign of Terror.
She was a victim?
Basically.
Because of how they staged her trial?
Basically, and the way how she was killed too. So following the king's execution, war with various European powers and intense divisions within the National Convention brought the French Revolution to its most violent and turbulent phase, right? So war is happening, right, with France and like the other countries of Europe at this point, right? And then the National Convention, there was a lot of divisions happening within the convention itself. So starting on June 1793, basically, this is literally like 5 months after Louis the 16th's death.
Okay.
Like the Jacobins end up seizing control of the National Convention from the more moderate Girondins and instituted a series of radical measures, including the establishment of a new calendar and efforts toward the eradication of Christianity.
I don't know what that has to do with religion. If
So
there's already a separation of church and state.
No, well, they want to get rid of it entirely. And it's actually ridiculous because they want to make a new freaking calendar system, really. They want to make a new calendar system. They want to get rid of, religion, which basically majority of the French country were Catholic, right? Catholicism was basically the state religion. And they would basically unleash the bloody Reign of Terror, right? Which was basically a 10-month period in which suspected enemies of the revolution were guillotined by the thousands. And of course, a lot of these killings were carried out under the orders of Robespierre by one man, Robespierre, who basically dominated the draconian Committee of Public Safety, right? So the Committee of Public Safety is basically supposed to be this committee that basically safeguards the revolution. They basically fish out people that are conspiring against the new French government and that are not being loyal to the French, by the new French government, basically.
That's insane.
It's like public safety. It's like this is basically a persecution of like people that you don't agree with.
That's insane. So now, this happens in the 10-month period. So what happens after that? After that 10-month period of, well, he's committing all of these executions, and what happens to him? Doesn't he end up suffering the consequences?
basically, yeah. But the thing is about about the Reign of Terror in more details is that Robespierre ends up creating this thing called like the religion of the supreme being.
The supreme being, that sounds nothing Christian.
You know, so basically what it was.
Oh, is this kind of like divine authority? Like,
I guess you could say that basically that like reason is the god of all. That you need to have, that you need to listen to reason and not like religion anymore. Reason is what rules the minds and hearts of the people, right? And so they basically destroyed churches. So the radicals ends up destroying churches, closing churches. They defecate churches.
Ooh, okay.
You know, they turn Notre Dame Cathedral, into a temple of the temple of reason. You know, in which basically a peasant woman, the wife of a press editor, or you know, someone that works with the press, like the press machine, right, for the newspapers, right, the printing machines. Like his wife ends up being like crowned as like the goddess of reason on the high altar of Notre Dame Cathedral. So this is really, I would say, this is the first time in a long time where a kingdom, a country persecutes their own people within the own
doesn't that sound
country.
like more like dictatorship at this point, where they just do like a...
No, exactly. Yeah, that's what it is. This has literally become a dictatorship, unfortunately. So, you know, it's like, so even in Notre Dame Cathedral, on the outside, there are statues of kings on the outside of Notre Dame Cathedral, lined up like on the sides.
All the kings, or just some of the kings?
You know, well, here's the thing. They thought, the peasants, you know, like they thought that those kings were past kings of France.
The peasants were past kings in another life? Okay.
No. The peasants thought that the statues were like statues of like the past kings of France. So, but the thing is, they weren't. They were actually depictions of the kings from the Bible.
The kings from the Bible, you say?
Yeah, they were a lot of those statues were depictions of like the apostles or biblical figures from the Old Testament.
Okay.
And that's the stupid thing about, well, I mean, it's not their fault. I shouldn't say stupid, because not all of them were educated. Not all of them were educated to know that, at least.
That they were educated, or they just didn't give them that education, that they weren't given that,
like,
that they didn't extend that education to be able to show them the actual names of the kings of the Bible. I feel like that could be a better
I feel like they
excuse.
didn't know, because like, they probably thought that these were just beautiful statues, architecture, right? But like many of them don't know the meaning. Many of them didn't know the meaning of behind the statues, I guess you would say, and they immediately thought like, oh, these are statues of the past king of the past French kings that oppressed us, blah blah blah, and all this. Oh, let's just destroy it. So unfortunately, you know, it's come to that, and you know, that's what radicalism. You know, that's what radicalism does. You know, that's what That's what people who are not well educated, you know, that blindly follow learned men, I guess you could say. You know, people who blindly follow men who are supposedly learned. That's what they do. You know, they end up destroying property. They end up blaming people that they don't. They end up blaming people that they don't like. You know, and you know, it's just crazy.
So how does this end? How does this end? Or what? during this 10-month period?
So basically, the people have gotten sick and tired of those in the National Convention have basically gotten sick and tired of Robespierre's reign of terror. Basically, they've gotten tired of his
what are they
reign
gonna do
because
about
that's
it?
the point about the reign of terror is because Robespierre was reigning over France with terror.
So how do they end?
So first of all, before we get to that, one of the leaders, Danton was one of the key figures in helping make the revolution happen, right? Everyone loved Danton, but eventually Robespierre caught up with him because Robespierre felt freaking threatened by Danton's popularity that eventually, Robespierre ordered Danton to be executed.
So the one who starts the revolution ends up getting executed by Robespierre, and then what?
So people eventually get mad at this, right? Because of
I mean, I guess rightfully so.
Well, because of what's happening, he just blindly accuses Danton and other people of conspiracy against the state, which maybe it wasn't true, right? But Robespierre was gonna run out of his luck because eventually Robespierre would basically face his own fate with the revolutionaries that he has led. So
then what? So he dies, and so
in 1794, this was in July, and sometime in July of 1794, Robespierre calls for a meeting with the National Convention, and the most ridiculous thing that any radical leader would do is make more baseless claims. So when Robespierre goes up to speak to the National Assembly on the podium, to the National Convention on the podium, he tells them, people here have been saying that I am doing a bad job. People here are accusing me of doing things bad. But citizens, I tell you, I am doing this for the country. My heart and mind is with the country. It is to keep unity and not to divide it. But eventually he gets into it where he says, oh, by the way, I have a list here of new names of suspected traitors. But I'm not going to give it to you yet. But I'm not going to reveal it to you.
Oh, yeah. Right?
Yeah, and, people were basically saying, people, historians have always assumed that, have said that, well, first of all, there's no claims.
There's no claims, and then what?
He didn't, he didn't have it.
Okay.
And so that was where, members of the National Convention was like, I think we should all kill Robespierre. All those in favor? And everyone raised their hand.
That's crazy.
Everyone literally voted to overthrow Robespierre.
I wonder if they ever
and
found...
to kill him, to have him executed.
I wonder even after, post-execution, if they ever, try to seize his belongings and then try to see if he actually had a note of all the names, or if he was just bluffing.
Well, the thing is, that's what a lot of historians are saying, that he was just bluffing. In chroniclers, they said that he was just bluffing.
Wow.
That he had a list, to basically strike fear. And so basically Robespierre is able to run away from the crowd, but then a few hours later, I think a day later, he was in the Hotel de Ville, and then the other members of the National Convention knew where he was, so they end up finding him. There's a power struggle. There's a firefight happening. Weapons being discharged. All this, right? A fighting happening. And Robespierre had a loaded pistol, but it misfired, and he ends up shooting himself in the jaw. He ends up shooting himself in the jaw. people say that he was trying to kill himself but missed, or like, you know, someone grabbed a gun but it aimed towards his jaw and it shot. And
we'll never know.
No, people does know, but I like the people too. I like
that's what I'm saying.
Listeners.
We as the people here will never know what actually happened. But okay, so he gets arrested.
He gets arrested. He's charged for treason, and on July 28th of 1794, he is wheeled out to the guillotine with his other followers, I guess you could say, like his other few followers, and he ends up getting killed by the guillotine, thus ending the Reign of Terror.
Okay, so where do we go now?
So this is where it leads to what's known as the Thermidorian reaction. So the death of Robespierre basically marked the beginning of what would be known as this Thermidorian reaction, which is a moderate phase in which the French people revolted against the Reign of Terror's excesses. So obviously the people that were wrongfully jailed, right, because of the Reign of Terror, you know, and all the other people, like they that's where they start doing like little riots here and there. And on August 22nd of 1795, so literally like 2 years later, or a year later, you should say, the National Convention, composed largely of the Girondins who had survived the Reign of Terror, approved a new constitution that created France's first bicameral legislature. Right, executive power would basically lie in the hands of a 5-member directory appointed by Parliament. Royalists and Jacobins protested the new regime, but were swiftly silenced by the army. All right, and then
rightfully so. 'Cause I think it's enough of the resistance for now.
Yeah, so the Royalists and the whatever was left of the Jacobins, right, they would be put down by the French army. So the directory was going to be in power for 4 years, right? And for 4 years, the directory was going to be in power, but they were riddled with financial crisis, popular discontent, inefficiency, and above all, basically political corruption. Nothing, you know, strange about it. I guess nothing new, like nothing strange about that. And by the late 1790s, the directors relied almost entirely on the military to maintain their authority and had ceded much of their power to the generals in the field.
Okay.
So because they haven't been able to control the situation that was happening in France, you know, mainly like the economic crisis, right? You know, in dealing with unrest that was happening in the country, like they had to rely on the military, and that's actually a bad thing for a government to do. That's like one of the worst things, you know, a body of government can do that does not have control of certain things within the country. If they're not getting their things together, then they have to rely on the military to do things. That's where things are about to happen. You know, bad things are gonna happen. Basically, power consumes people. You know, power grab is going to consume the people in charge. And of course, on November 9th, 1799, as frustration with her leadership reached a fever pitch, a young general by the name of Napoleon Bonaparte would stage a coup d'etat, abolishing the directory and appointing himself as France's first consul. And because of that, it is said that event, that coup that Napoleon did, would mark the end of the French Revolution.
Oh, okay.
And a new era would happen after that.
Okay. Anything else on this before we send it off?
Well, like I said, people. When I mentioned it in the first part that we did, the origins of the idea of left and right wing party, right? If you people are saying I'm part of the left or I'm the right, or you hear people talking about the far left or the far right, which unfortunately we're hearing that today a lot in this country and the United States here. Just remember this, that it originated from the French Revolution. The
Jacobins and the Girondins?
Basically, with the Jacobins and the moderates and the liberals. Basically.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, moderates and liberals. So,
gotcha.
So, like I said, the the term left and right wing, it originates from the French Revolution, basically, and so it was a bloody time. The French Revolution was a bloody period where people just baselessly, accusing people of things, and they end up paying the price. They end up getting killed because they just didn't like what. They just didn't like the person, like personally, or, So, French Revolution it can be considered to be like the first, the first modern form of socialism, communism, authoritarian.
In a brief phase of democracy.
Basically, a threat to democracy, like a real threat to democracy. Like the French Revolution was basically a real threat to democracy because it was led by men who only wanted to have things for their own benefit. That wanted to benefit themselves and not the people, basically.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And with that, we thank you guys for listening on this 2-part series of the French Revolution. We appreciate you guys sticking through the end. Next time you hear from us, we will be discussing something new. So we'll leave that up. As a mystery for next time. So as always, this has been your host,
Martin
and Jose, and this has been A Drink with the Past.
See you later.